Domhnall says your family were killed. Osrith nodded, confirming the old lie, playing with her cup to add texture to it. And have a fine accent. You are from Eofuic, Bernicia. Osrith kept her hands on the cup and her eyes on her hands. That was where my family was from. Which was true, the family she had been given to by the Lindisfarne abbot after her hand injury. She had claiming she, too, was going to Iona to find her father, had been from CHRONOLOGICAL, and adopted the dead family as her own. An extra layer of mislead in case her uncle sought her still. We killed the Bernicians. He leaned forward, play fighting at a battle like he might towards a child, and, despite herself, Osrith laughed. Then, Grioghair pulled away, looking seriously at her. I am sorry you were hurt, girl, he said again, a hand going to her arm, his fingers wrapping around it. My men felt Colleen's loss, still feel it. He leaned forward, emphasizing his words. I have told them that you can walk naked amongst them and you will come to not a motive harm. Grioghair laughed, at the idea he had created. Let me make it up to you. He reached for yet another jug of spirit from a passing servant, dropping splashes of it into the cup she had drained. Drink, that's it, he encouraged, and smiled at her indulgence. See, we are getting on, are we not? He held on to her arm. Sladayish, Osrith urged. Slower. I do not understand. But Grioghair's hand moved up and down her arm, tickling it. You have a fair beastie here, climbing up here, he laughed. Damn Hanilla. A spider, Osrith's slow mind translated, and a part of her sighed inwardly at his idiocy as he pretended to walk his fingers up her arm. I would have you queen of the whole land, Grioghair declared, leaning close to her ear. Osrith could feel his usage-infused breath on her neck as he moved his hand onto her thigh, so suddenly that Osrith missed her chance to back away. Yes, he murmured, pressed the flat of his hand between her betrousered legs, fingers searching the bumps of her cunt. Osrith managed to drag his hand away with both of her own, jumping to her feet. She looked up and caught Tagd's eye, who was waving his cup around in merriment as Fergus lay on the table, flat drunk, legs moving to his friend's songs. The Pictish warriors were laughing hysterically at them. If you will excuse me, Osrith managed, kicking over her stool as Grioghair made another attempt to finger her. I must rejoin my friends. She strode across the floor, faltering a little as she remembered Tagd's face when she had belittled him. She wheeled round, her face flushing hot. Go to the stable, she told herself. But Tagd had seen her and was calling her over, as if their cross words that evening had never been. Osrith, join us. We know a song about an Ursel, he sang. Iora, Iora, Fergus added, sitting up on the table, then burping loudly. Or, Fergus continued. I have a joke, an Anglish joke. How many Gaelish horses do we all need? He pointed around at the table at the Pictish warriors, Tagd and her. One each. You once finished, laughing uproariously. Each, he repeated. Osrith smiled but shook her head. No, thank you. Tagd's face fell, he looked crestfallen. You're going so soon? One of us must be going. With him? Tagd looked past her, and Osrith turned to see Grioghair standing just behind her, hands on hips. No, she declared, stepping around Grioghair. Alone. Tagd dipped his head and stepped over Fergus's legs, making to follow her, but Grioghair was striding after her, and out into the chill of the early winter night. Osrith, he pushed past Grioghair, as Osrith turned to look at her friend, but the leader of the MacGriogairs put out a hand, pushing Tagd to the floor. Before Osrith could protest, Bué half unscabbarded, a figure appeared between the two men. Allow me, Prince Domhnall, Osrith exclaimed, never before so pleased to see anyone in her life. He put out a hand to Tagd, who looked between Grioghair and Osrith. I can escort Osrith, he declared. Please, rejoin the feast. Domhnall held Tagd's eye for a second, and the tall warrior nodded, walking gingerly over the damp earth. Grioghair. Aye, if you are sure, he added, looking at Osrith. Prince Domhnall can walk with me, she confirmed, and Domhnall's ally returned, with more care than Tagd, to the hall. Domhnall and Osrith walked the short way to the stables in silence. He kept pace with her, arms by his sides, and made no attempt to touch her, as he had done at Glenorchy. Yet, Osrith wanted to grab Domhnall, demand that he tell her if it was he who would accompanying them to Caerleguilid, to the court of the Cuthbert chosen Cumbrian king. Domhnall had said more. But, equally, she did not want to know, if it was not him. Breaking from a quiet contemplation of his own, Domhnall pulled at the door of the stable for her, but it appeared to be locked. Locked from the inside. Constantine. Osrith cursed. What do you mean? Domhnall's eyes were on her, and to Osrith it seemed for a moment that Domhnall thought she had got him confused with his cousin. When Constantine was angry I wouldn't play, or we had to get him to do something he didn't like. He would play tricks on me, Osrith recounted, assessing the stable for access points. Lock me out of the castle or steal my food. Dirty a floor I'd cleaned or pass a false message from me. She sighed. I wonder what he thinks I have done now. Then Osrith smiled. There was an open shutter, and she pointed. I can climb up for you, Domhnall offered. But Osrith shook her head and despite twinges from her ribs began to scale the trunk of what was once a pine tree and was now one of 4 supports of a lean-to where an Aaron's horses had the luxury of a farrier. No more than a few feet up, and Domhnall, who had been watching Osrith shin unsteadily upwards, exclaimed, It was you. In Armika. Osrith looked lone, then jumped back to the damp grass. Domhnall's face was animated with a long-ago memory. We were asked to search, and I saw someone dash to the kitchens. Then I remember how you jumped from the yew at Iona. Yes, Osrith nodded. I climbed when I heard on Shada with someone. You told me it was Domhnall. Domhnall nodded. Then, Osrith saw his shoulders dip, and she extended a hand to his arm. I thought I could form an alliance, but I was very mistaken. He glanced over his shoulder. Domhnall has been the best at forging an alliance in support of himself. Just look at his supporters, from all over Alba. Even the Strathclydians have found that some amongst them cannot tolerate Eochaid with his kingmaker Giric. You could have, I am sure, said Osrith, her head nagging her to get it down on the straw as soon as possible. You're waiting for your moment to make your claim, and in the meantime, you search for your sister. Domhnall took a step from Osrith, her hand falling away. He looked at her as if he was about to say something else, then nodded slowly, turning and striding off in the direction of the hall. Osrith wanted to call out her thanks for his consideration to walk with her, but he was too far away. So instead, Osrith looked up to the sloping roof of the farrier's quarters and began to climb towards the shuttered window. The shutter was not fixed closed, so she pulled it open, sticking one leg through the window and then the other. But as she cleared the sill, a hand caught her ankle, pulling her into the straw. It was Constantine. Osrith struggled, swinging around, and managed to scramble to her feet. In the darkness, Constantine grabbed out to her. No, Constantine. It was him. He had barred the door. You were speaking to Grigor, he accused. Straw shuffled by his feet as he tried again to grasp her. I speak to many men, Osrith replied. The hayloft was wide, and at the end by the steps it was taller. If she could get over to the, where a lantern glowed. He liked you, Constantine whined. So? Osrith shot back. I didn't like him. When has that ever mattered? He bore down on her, swiping towards her, then struck her face with the flat of his hand. Osrith was shocked. Constantine had barely spoken to her since leaving Doia, and now he had hit her. In the time it has taken for her to comprehend this, Constantine hit her again. No, stop it, Constantine, Osrith shouted back, bearing down on her in anger. But it was the wrong thing to have done, and he gripped her shoulders and pushed her down onto the straw bales which were covered with oiled wool cloth. She tried to get up, but he was tearing at her jerkin, then at her shirt. Osrith managed to swing out a leg, slipping from under him, leaving a torn shirt in his hand, her chest throbbing with exertion. What was hers problem? Why was he attacking her? Half naked, save some torn pieces of cloth across her chest, Osrith swung her hand to strike out as he lunged for her again, and this time, grabbed wrists, holding them tight over her head with one hand as he drove her towards the wall next to the window. A thought struck Osrith as she looked down through the blackness of the ground below. and she thought for a moment he would throw her out. But instead, he bore down on her, face close to her own. "You liked him, Griogea?" He gripped both her wrists in one hand while swinging the other back and thumping her in the face when she squirmed. He was angry. Osrith struggled again, but he held her fast. "You want what he would have done?" Constantine took her wrists higher, which hurt Osrith's ribs as her back arched more. She tried to fight him off, but Constantine bent his head down towards Osrith's face, then, turning, bit her hard on her neck, just under her ear, his black hair brushing her shoulder as his left hand fought her ragged shirt for her breasts. "No, no!" Osrith cried, and she struggled again, but this only seemed to inflame him more, and she could feel his hardness on her leg. Inclining her head up, she got out of his grasp, hitting him hard in the shoulder to do so. He looked back, astonished. "No, Constantine. Find a servant." "You are leaving," Constantine complained, as if she had betrayed him. He fought to catch hold of her again but missed. "You arranged it. You wanted me to." "All of it was your idea," says Domnall. She could hear him catching his breath, an aerosol of that night's spirit leaving his mouth. Constantine went to hit her again, and this time, Osrith pushed him over, but he managed to catch her arm and he pulled Osrith clumsily on top of himself. They were fighting, as they had done in those years before, when Osrith was more Constantine's size, when he envied her skill with a sword, when he commanded her and tricked her. He was stronger than Osrith now, but she realized as he struck out, his blows were spirit-affected, inaccurate and weak. "You want me to go?" Osrith shouted back, able to push Constantine off, as he rolled on top of her and she tried to smooth down her damaged jerkin. The shirt was beyond repair, but Constantine was quick enough now as he scrambled after her, and he grabbed her ankles. Osrith fell, awkwardly, her mending ribs giving out a shooting pain. "I need you to go. Only you can do this," he panted. "And what is this?" Perhaps if she talked, he may relax, for she was still struggling against his strength. But he did not answer. Instead, his hands roamed her body, as they had always done, to feel that she was there. "No, Constantine!" Osrith exclaimed as waves, from a different time and place, surrounded her, water pouring round her ears and up to her eyes as she tries to stand on tiptoe. She shook her head, trying not to think of it. She was here and now, and here and now, Constantine was doing his best to get the rest of her clothes off. He wanted to hump her, Osrith knew. And she knew she did not want to be held down, she did not want to feel helpless, as Nine Fingers and his brother had made her feel helpless, as Constantine made to push his cockeye to her. And Osrith knew how not to drown that night, how to swim, to survive. She had seen a servant girl do it, with a willing soldier from Asgard at the back of the monastery on the night of Findlaith's funeral. And, Osrith wanted him to fill her up, to make her feel that shiver all through her hips and back and chest. She found his cock, which was growing hard, and held on to it. She was in charge, not Nine Fingers. She wanted pleasure, too. For that, she needed Constantine stiff. The prince groaned, as Osrith gripped his cock, getting from under him as the first in line to Alba's throne sank into the straw. She eased his foreskin back and forth so his wetness squelched between her fingers. He wasn't yet fully stiff, but Osrith sat on him anyway, engulfing him, her knees apart, on either side of his hips, moving herself on top of him. She raised her bum more and found pleasure building around her hips almost at once as she drove him further into herself. Then she found that squeezing her cunt and driving down onto him at the same time was causing him to sigh out of control breaths, and, as his own pleasure grew, so did hers. Constantine reached up, under her shirt to fondle her breasts, running his sword-calloused hands over her skin, her nipples pushing against his palms and pushing into them. This friction caused Osrith to jerk downwards onto him, warming pleasure flooding her breasts, her chest, her waist. Reaching round to her buttocks, Constantine pulled her to his rhythm, which didn't take him long. Osrith closed her eyes. Then, unexpectedly, the face of a man crystallized in her mind. It was his deft hands moving her breasts, drawing out her nipples between thumb and forefinger, making her groan. Not Constantine, where had he learned to do that, which catalyzed her climax, his cock pleasuring her cunt, hitting a spot which was getting her off beautifully. Osrith bore down onto Constantine's mound with all her might, and came. Later, she would sleep in Constantine's arms, there, in the stables, and in the morning, would dress in the clothes Domnall had arranged to be brought to the stables for her, left by the stable door, accompanying a tentative knock. She would dress in them, considering them much more roomy, after rolling what she could salvage of her old clothes into her blanket, leaving Constantine asleep in the straw. She would consider Domnall's words, "Be a man but do not deny you are a woman." Osrith would consider that there was no doubt she was a woman last night. She would slip off to the kitchens, dense-headed from the Uisjbetha, for a cup of hot water in which to stew the last of her abortifacient root, wash her hair and tie the growing strands in a lace, and grab a crust of grey bread to satisfy her for the day, before wrapping more for them all in a linen cloth from the kitchen cupboard. Despite his anger still at her leaving, she would ride to the coast with Tagd and Fergus, where a boat would carry them past Strathclyde to the North Cumbraland coast. They were there to raise support for Domnall, and the first place they would be looking for it would be Halligwafikland, the land of King Guthred. The second was to dissuade the Norse army led by two brothers from allying with the Ochade, and third, Osrith was there to spy. It was the three of them. Fergus at the sail, as Tagd's expertise got them afloat and assail before daybreak, and Osrith felt pleased they were all three together again. It was as it should be. And, as the boat was about to leave Van Erin's fortress harbour, Tagd to pilot the craft through the treacherous local waters, two men stood watching. Osrith was unable to deduce who they were, until the mist cleared a little and she made out Domnall and Constantine. Her heart would beat faster when she missed the third cousin, and her spirits rose as one man ran to join them. She turned her head, trying to discern who the man was, willing it with all her might to be Domnall. The running man jumped aboard to join them just in time. It was Grioghair.